Most people live in a state of constant distraction, caught between external demands, social expectations, and an endless stream of information that fragments their attention and scatters their energy. This condition, while normalized by the pace of modern life, is fundamentally dangerous to the human psyche. It erodes agency, it dissolves identity, and perhaps most critically, it makes genuine transformation nearly impossible. You cannot grow if you are constantly reacting to the world outside of you, and you cannot change if your attention is perpetually hijacked by things that do not align with your deepest values. Focus, real, directed, intentional focus, is the currency of self-actualization. Where your attention goes, your life follows. If your attention is being spent on everything and everyone except yourself, then you are not living your life. You are living a programmed response to the world. Psychologically, we know that the brain is an energy-efficient machine. It defaults to familiar patterns, habits, and beliefs, especially under stress. This means that when you give all your attention to the external, to what people think, what social media says, what your environment demands, you are strengthening the neural pathways that keep you stuck. You're reinforcing the old self, the self shaped by conditioning, by fear, by unresolved pain. That's not focus, that's unconscious repetition. This is why the first and most crucial step in transforming your life is withdrawing your attention from the outside world and returning it to the inner world. That doesn't mean you ignore your responsibilities or isolate yourself. It means you begin to take ownership of where your energy is going, moment by moment. You start asking, what am I focusing on? Why am I focusing on it? Is this contributing to the person I want to become, or reinforcing the one I'm trying to outgrow? This is not an abstract concept, it is neurological reality. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of our conscious decision-making and focus, is like a spotlight. Wherever it shines, neuronal activity increases. If you constantly focus on problems, pain, and the past, those areas of the brain grow stronger. But if you begin to direct that spotlight inward, with awareness, with discipline, you activate the mechanisms required for personal change. It's a philosophical shift as much as a psychological one. To focus on yourself is not selfish, it is the beginning of responsibility. It is the recognition that your life, your choices, your outcomes, they are your own. Not your parents', not your bosses', not society's, yours, and to reclaim your life, you must first reclaim your attention. We live in a culture that rewards reactivity, fast opinions, faster judgments, shallow interpretations. But transformation requires depth. It requires space to think, to sit with discomfort, to reflect on patterns that have lived inside you for years, decades even, and decide which ones are no longer acceptable. That space does not emerge from chaos. It emerges from focus, and let me be clear, this is difficult. It's easier to scroll than to sit with your own mind. It's easier to project blame than to accept responsibility. But the path of ease is not the path of growth. Focus is a discipline, a daily act of returning to your breath, to your values, to your vision. And every time you do that, every time you interrupt the loop of external reactivity and choose presence instead, you reclaim a piece of yourself that had been lost. You begin to see your thoughts not as truth, but as patterns. You begin to notice how much of your emotional life has been shaped by the environment, and not by conscious choice. And with that awareness comes power, because you can't change what you're not aware of. But once you are aware, truly aware, you can no longer pretend to be asleep. So ask yourself this: what would happen if, just for today, you withdrew your attention from everything that doesn't feed your growth? What if you became radically conscious of where your energy is going and chose instead to invest it in understanding who you are, what you believe, and what you want your life to stand for? Focus is not just a mental tool. It is a moral act. It is the decision to stop living reactively and start living intentionally. The person you could become is waiting on the other side of that choice. Take your attention back. It's the first real move toward freedom. There's a fundamental principle you need to understand if you're serious about transformation. Your energy flows where your attention goes. That's not motivational fluff. It's a principle grounded in neuroscience, psychology, and even basic biology. Every time you focus on something, whether it's a goal, a memory, a fear, or a possibility, you are feeding it. You are devoting cognitive and emotional resources to it. And over time, what you consistently feed begins to shape your perception, your identity, and eventually, your reality. Most people never realize this. They spend years unconsciously directing their energy toward things that drain them. They ruminate over past failures, worry about hypothetical futures, obsess over how they're perceived by others. They give their emotional attention to distractions, arguments, and digital illusions, and then they wonder why they feel tired, anxious, resentful, or unfulfilled. But if you zoom out and examine the structure of their daily mental life, the answer becomes obvious. They've been investing their energy, day after day, into things that offer no return. That's not just inefficient, it's destructive, it's also avoidable, but only if you become conscious of the relationship between attention and energy. Think of it like this: attention is the steering wheel and energy is the fuel. Where you point the wheel, your energy follows, and wherever that energy accumulates, growth happens, whether you want it or not. If you constantly focus on your inadequacy, your resentment, your limitations, you're growing those patterns. You're giving them more emotional mass, more cognitive real estate. You're training your nervous system to operate from a baseline of lack, fear, or resistance. This is not a minor issue. This is at the core of how identity is formed. Your identity is not a fixed entity. It's a process, one that's constantly being shaped by your attention and your emotion, and most people have outsourced both. They've allowed algorithms, opinions, trends, and traumas to dictate the content of their minds and the chemistry of their bodies. It's a kind of quiet slavery, comfortable, familiar, and self-reinforcing. To escape that loop, you must take your attention seriously. You must treat it as the scarce resource that it is. And more than that, you must understand that your energy, your emotional vitality, your mental sharpness, your creative spark responds to what you choose to focus on. This is why people who dwell on problems tend to find more of them. It's not necessarily because their lives are worse, but because their perception is trained to filter reality through a lens of dysfunction. That's how the brain works. It's called selective attention, and it's the mechanism behind confirmation bias. Focus creates filters. Filters reinforce beliefs. Beliefs shape behavior, and behavior defines the trajectory of your life. Now, this doesn't mean you avoid difficult truths or pretend everything is fine when it isn't. That's denial, not transformation. What it means is that you become intentional about where your mind rests. You stop letting it wander into corners that breed bitterness and instead direct it toward spaces that offer growth. You deliberately engage with thoughts, emotions, and questions that challenge you to rise, not shrink. It also means learning to notice when your attention has been hijacked, because it will be frequently. Whether by external noise or internal conditioning, your attention is constantly under threat. And each time you unconsciously give it away, you weaken your ability to direct your own energy. But the moment you notice the hijack, you gain the opportunity to interrupt the pattern. You can pull your focus back and place it somewhere productive, somewhere meaningful, somewhere that aligns with the person you're trying to become. That's the shift, not just from distraction to focus, but from reaction to intention, because the quality of your life is, to a large extent, the quality of your focus, and the quality of your focus determines the flow of your energy. When you get those two aligned, everything changes. Your relationships improve, not because others change, but because your attention begins to notice their strengths rather than their faults. Your goals become more achievable, not because they get easier, but because you've stopped scattering your energy on things that don't matter. Your inner world becomes more peaceful, not because life gets quieter, but because you've stopped tuning into the wrong frequency. This is not a one-time decision, it's a daily practice. You have to catch yourself, redirect and repeat. Over time, that repetition rewires your brain. You begin to train yourself out of emotional chaos and into coherence. You become less reactive and more responsive, less fragmented and more whole. The point is simple but profound. Whatever you give your attention to, you feed. Whatever you feed grows, so choose wisely. Choose deliberately. Focus is not a luxury, it is survival. And where your focus goes, your future follows. One of the most difficult truths we have to face, especially if we're serious about transformation, is that a large part of our emotional life isn't based on the present moment, or even on the objective reality of a situation. It's based on memory, More specifically, it's based on the emotional residue of the past that we've unknowingly rehearsed so many times that it's become familiar. This emotional familiarity, often rooted in pain, resentment, anxiety, or shame, becomes a baseline, a kind of default setting for how we interpret the world and ourselves. And because the nervous system craves the familiar, even when that familiarity is destructive, we often find ourselves returning to those old emotions, not consciously, of course. No one wakes up and says, "Today, I'm going to feel powerless," but it happens. The mind recalls an experience, the body responds with emotion, and before we know it, we're reliving something that's no longer happening. This is what it means to be addicted to the past. It's not always about memory, it's about emotional programming. And the longer we live in those states, the more our identity fuses with them. There's a biological basis for this. When we think about a painful event and attach strong emotion to it, we reinforce the neural networks associated with that experience. Every repetition makes that network more efficient. Over time, the emotional memory becomes embedded, not just in the brain but in the body. The body begins to anticipate the emotion before the thought even arises. You walk into a room and feel anxious, not because there's danger, but because the pattern has been rehearsed so often that it activates automatically. It becomes a loop. Thought triggers feeling, feeling triggers thought, and around it goes. To break free of this loop, you must interrupt the emotional addiction to the past. You have to stop letting yesterday's emotions dominate today's decisions. And this isn't a matter of just thinking positively. That's shallow advice. What's required is a deeper act of awareness. You must be able to catch yourself in the pattern, name it, and refuse to act from it. That's hard. It's hard because those patterns feel like you. They're familiar. They're safe even when they're miserable, but the truth is they're not you. They're the emotional shadows of who you used to be. This is why it's not enough to intellectually want change. You have to embody it. You have to teach your body, your nervous system, that it doesn't need to keep preparing for pain or rejection or failure. And that requires a new emotional experience, one that's practiced consistently enough to override the old programming. That's what healing actually is, not forgetting the past, but no longer emotionally living in it. Now, this doesn't mean you suppress or deny what you've been through. It means you stop using it as your reference point for who you are. You stop letting old pain define your identity. You stop measuring new opportunities against old betrayals. If you want to create a new future, you cannot bring the emotional architecture of the past with you. You must consciously construct a new emotional baseline, one that reflects who you are becoming, not who you've been. This is where practices like meditation, journaling, and breathwork become tools, not trends. They give you the space to observe your emotional states without becoming them. They allow you to interrupt the automatic reactions and choose a different response. And that's where transformation starts. In the moment you catch yourself about to repeat a pattern, and instead of obeying it, you pause, you breathe, you choose differently. This is not just a psychological strategy. It's a philosophical stance. It says, I am not my past. I am not the worst thing that ever happened to me. I am not the emotions I rehearsed to survive. I am the one who chooses what comes next. That is the essence of responsibility. That is where freedom begins. But here's the paradox. In order to move forward, you have to be willing to feel uncomfortable. Because when you let go of familiar emotions, your body will resist. It will protest. It will tell you this isn't safe, go back to what you know. That's not intuition, it's conditioning, and you must learn to tell the difference. Growth often feels like loss at first, not because you're losing who you are, but because you're shedding who you were. So ask yourself honestly, which emotions have I rehearsed for so long that I now mistake them for my identity, and what would it look like if I stopped practicing them? If you want to create a new self, you have to stop feeling like the old one.